Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex. It's the hangover edition following the triple header. We've had back-to-back weeks of F1 and finally we can go into the weekend with a bit of a break. Not that we don't like F1, but 3 weeks in a row does get a bit too much, and it's, I guess, as we said, the hangover edition. So thanks for joining us again. My name is Jawad, joined by Baden, and it does feel like a bit of a hangover, you have to say. 3 back-to-back weekends of F1, a lot of championship changing outcomes from those 3 races, and now I guess time to reflect on not only the British Grand Prix, but just the triple header as on its own.
As far as hangovers go, it's probably not the worst fallout, certainly of that three-peat. The last one there on Sunday night, Silverstone, probably took the cake as a spectacle. It just really had everything you could ask for, and wouldn't be F1 without the drama when title battles reach fever pitch.
Yeah, it did reach fever pitch at Silverstone over the weekend, especially with the Silver Arrows and the Lewis Hamilton juggernaut brought to its knees, I guess, at Silverstone. We talked about pre-race how it was a fortress for those guys, with Mercedes having won 5 races in a row from 2013 and then for Lewis Hamilton 4 in a row. So, to see that run come to an end, and given how Saturday went with qualifying and that epic lap that Hamilton sort of pulled out of nowhere to claim pole position by probably the faintest of margins, it's pretty big, the fact that they sort of threw it away, you could say, on Sunday.
As much as Ferrari at previous circuits have asserted itself, look at Azerbaijan or Canada, really strongholds in the past for Mercedes. This one just has such a stigma to it. I guess just the fact that it's Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton's notionally home event, as much as Mercedes is German, they're based and have been in their heritage for decades, really. So for them, it was as much as the next race in Germany will be on home turf, and I think caught a lot of people off guard, and just coupled with what happened on the first lap, it really added a bit of a sting to the tail, and you could see that nothing that Ferrari did which made it a victory which they had just fallen to their lap. They absolutely executed to precision, and full credit to them.
So we'll come to the first lap in a moment, but Sebastian Vettel winning his 4th race of the season. He went on to equal Alan Prost's career tally of 51 race wins too, so great job there for Seb, and then extends his title lead out to 8 points now as well. So big weekend, and I guess you could say perhaps one of the big winners from this triple header, Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari, which we'll come to towards the end there. But Lewis Hamilton had pole, but he lost it going into turn 1. Just a bit of an overambitious start, you could say, from the man on home soil. Then he became entangled with Kimi Räikkönen at turn 3 and ended up having spun, dropped to the rear of the field. Kimi Räikkönen given a 10-second stop-go penalty, which he had to serve at his first pit stop. But then we saw a remarkable recovery drive at that from Lewis Hamilton. But it's what was in the postscript, I guess, that really caught everyone off guard and really left a bit of a sour taste, I guess, in everyone's mouths following what was a really, really epic race to watch. The fact that Lewis Hamilton didn't even stand by for those Parc Fermé interviews and had to be interviewed on the podium by Martin Brundle separately. He claimed that he was a bit too tired, a bit too exhausted, but all we know that there was a lot of emotion there. The fact that he came out and said that interesting tactics from the other team, referring to Ferrari, and just basically blaming them for, intentionally trying to crash into him on the first lap. And cited that, what happened in France as well with Vettel going into Bottas, that was intentional to try and take one of the Mercedes out in the race. So, let's delve into that straight away.
You got to look at each incident objectively, and certainly at France, when you look at the way that Vettel had his collision with Bottas there, he was pinched by both Mercedes and had the very barest of lockups into what is an extremely abrupt first corner, you could say. So it was very marginal, really. If he was even in the wrong, it was just the positioning of each car. Bottas on the outside in that case, and on this occasion it was Hamilton on the outside into a right-hander, and he himself ran wide and Kimi Räikkönen similarly, but a bit more overtly, locked the brakes, and from there a collision was almost inevitable. I don't think you could have said Ferrari went in from whatever turn 18, went straight through the pits just with a bullseye painted on Hamilton as though that was premeditated off the line. And it's just ludicrous to think that they're actually... Ferrari, in the heat of a championship battle, that's their intention, to just wipe out its opposition rather than going about its own job.
Yeah, given that, Raikkonen was then given that 10-second penalty, despite many saying that, it's on the first lap, it could have been just classed as a racing incident, if the stewards were being fair, same with what happened in France. But then, you've got on the other side of the spectrum the inconsistency with the penalty, the fact that France, Vettel only got a 5-second penalty, and then 10 seconds for Raikkonen for hitting Hamilton. And controversial as he is, Jacques Villeneuve has said that, the reason why Kimi got 10 seconds was because it's Hamilton he hit. So suddenly penalties are going to be judged on who you hit rather than the severity of what the crime was, let alone there actually being a crime, because we could argue, it was a racing incident on the first lap. The fact that, there was really nowhere to go for Kimi, there's other cars around him, and it was just an unfortunate circumstance that it had to happen. And what you said too, the fact that, they didn't come off the line with the intention to take out Lewis Hamilton. I mean, what is this... Dodgem cars or whatever, where, let's take out the other guy for the sake of the championship. I mean, we're not even halfway through yet, some people have come out of the woodworm and said, this is the tactics that the other team's using, which just, there's no basis to it.
The proof will be at Germany if by chance it comes to pass that Hamilton runs into Vettel and he's only issued a 5-second penalty, then there's going to be serious questions.
There would be no penalty. There would be no penalty issued
because it'll be Vettel on his home turf and Hamilton running into the hometown
hero. It'd be racing incident basically.
And
so
if that's the case, the pitchforks can come out well and truly.
But regardless of that, with all that, and then afterwards, of course, in the Parc Fermé interviews, Kimi Räikkönen did apologise, said that, he took full responsibility for it, and which I thought was the right thing to do, given the fact that, Kimi, a lot of people criticise him for his character and everything, but he's a racer, a proper racer through and through, and he realised that he was at fault for it. He accepted the responsibility perhaps more so than he should have done, I think. I think he took too much of the blame on himself, but he did a good job. He was humble about it, and it was just... I know the emotion is there post-race immediately, and for Lewis being a home race and everything, but you don't just go out and say things like that, it was intentional. And then, given the fact that the team as well, Toto Wolff, who's normally so, I guess, not unemotional, but he's so diplomatic about things, that he almost backed up Lewis Hamilton's claim, saying that James Allison's words were that it was either intentional or stupid, so around those lines. So even the team was backing up Hamilton with those claims.
Yeah, I think when the entire party is concurring on that idea that it was, I guess in those words, that it was incompetence, so said James Allison, if you believe Toto Wolff, who perhaps ironically threw his chief aerodynamicist under the bus there, and only about a month after he had already come out and said he wasn't happy that Allison had been pointed out as the one raising those concerns about Ferrari's design tactics. It's a bit of a humorous after story, I guess, in this particular instance. But for Mercedes, I think as part of the bigger picture, it shows that when they've all put their cards on the table like this, they're really starting to feel that pressure, which Ferrari's applied in almost anonymous fashion. They haven't won every race, but they're just a lot more clinical and around the park, unlike previous years when complete stuff up and they're nowhere to be seen. At least this time they're salvaging points when things aren't going their way, and as a result they lead both standings, and convincingly so.
But, as you say, in applying it in an anonymous fashion, like that could go back to the pre-season as well, where there wasn't really a lot of hype building around them. There wasn't a lot of noise coming out of the Ferrari camp. And then, of course, controversially, they've had this media ban on personnel. Like media's not allowed to interview anyone. They only communicate via very vague press releases and all that sort of stuff. So just keeping the cards close to the chest and perhaps getting on with the business and just focusing on that sort of stuff has probably done them better this year for it. And you so rightly wrote about Mercedes perhaps showing those signs of cracking under the pressure. Like, we could add to that what happened in Austria, for example, too, with James Vowles being thrown under the bus as well. The fact that, rather than showing the composure that in that sort of situation where, yes, a mistake was made and Lewis Hamilton was arguably had been cost a better result. Well, he retired anyway with a mechanical failure. Usually you wouldn't see that from a team of Mercedes standards. So, it's 2 races in a row, you could say, that they've shown those kind of those frailties, and it's cost them a lot of points.
And you can just see from Mercedes, and if you're compassionate for a moment, they are frustrated that they've lost a potential 1-2 at France, but you can't argue at Britain. The way that it unfolded, those multiple safety cars undoubtedly helped Hamilton's cause, but I think his fans, they're quite happy to erase that idea that he had the poor getaway and could have fallen to as low as 4th if Räikkönen had have cleanly overtaken him into turn 3 there, but they're all convinced that it was a certain fait accompli, that their man was going to win the race, as though it was like Vettel somehow fluked into a very lucky win by fault of what happened with Räikkönen and Hamilton when he was already well into the distance by then.
Yeah, well, you forget the start that Hamilton did have, and he dropped, I think, 2 positions on the start, maybe 3 positions, and of course being entangled with Räikkönen. So yeah, he shouldn't have been in that position in the first place, but that was of his own doing, and I guess that was a penalty for having that poor start on his behalf. But anyway, after we saw Hamilton start his recovery drive, Kimi had to serve that 10-second penalty. Hamilton ended up catching the top 5 after that first round of pit stops. We had the safety car come out for the first time on lap 33 because Marcus Ericsson went into the wall just off Abbey. That corner's seen quite a few crashes over the weekend, so another nasty one there for Ericsson. Bad day for Sauber, which we'll get to later anyway. So Ferrari ended up double stacking again under the pit stop, which worked to their benefit. Fresh tyres, of course. Max Verstappen came in as well, whilst Bottas led the race on the medium tyre. Hamilton was up there too, but then little did we expect a second safety car to come on lap 38 with Romain Grosjean and Carlos Sainz both crashing out, I think at the same corner that Ericsson crashed too. So
I know that was on the I think that was on the back straight.
On the back straight, okay,
the old turn one, you could call it.
Going into the old turn one, so yeah, there you go. But that was pretty nasty as well, and I guess I don't know who to blame for that one just yet. I think it might have been a racing incident, but Grosjean, you could say, after being hero in Austria, coming back down to 0, and Haas getting a bit frustrated, of course, as well, throwing away that excellent quality result with both cars in the top 10 once again.
Yeah, I think it's reached a point for Grosjean where he's run out of his 9 lives and the Wolves are circling, whether it's a Leclerc or even talk of maybe a Perez. If Force India were to fold, then Grosjean's really got to be quite clinical in the back half of the season.
Well, it won't be Santino Ferrucci, that's for sure, but we'll come to that a bit later. So, yeah, with that second safety car out, I guess there was no opportunity for Mercedes to make that second pit stop under the safety car, because without losing track position, which, again, they could have pulled the trigger when Ferrari pitted and decided to get their guys in for that free pit stop under the first safety car. But yeah, no chance to do that without losing track position. Under pressure from Ferrari once again. But this, I guess, resulted in what we had an awesome 4-way wheel-to-wheel battle between Bottas in the lead with Vettel and then Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Räikkönen. So positions 1 to 4, all just battling wheel to wheel. It was so epic when you saw it on track. Vettel ultimately made the lunge going into Brooklands on lap 47 to take the lead from Bottas. Bottas's tyres basically shot, ended up having to concede that second place to his teammate, and then of course Kimi on the fresher tyres too was able to come back and take third from Valtteri. So again, Valtteri losing out there sadly, but that was, I think, 3-4 laps worth of just wow. You just didn't want to take your eyes off the screen at that time.
Yeah, as enticing as that sight was, it does make you wonder if Mercedes had perhaps pitted both cars, if not split the strategies. You might have had Bottas there back in 5th, but on superior rubber, or whether he could have had a run to the line. And as it was, he did well probably to hold Vettel off for several laps after that second safety car, but as soon as that happened, his day was done, and it was a shame to see him yet again. It's been the story of his season, essentially. He ends up at the bottom of the pack out of almost not just Ferraris and Mercedes, but now behind the Red Bulls, and you just can't take a trick this season.
Yeah, unfortunately that's the case, but a win should come sooner rather than later for the Austrian Grand Prix pole sitter, that is, as well. But he would have picked up a couple of positions, as you say, in hindsight, if he had gone on an alternate strategy and get the soft tyres on perhaps in that last stint or whatever, because we had Max Verstappen drop out of the race with a mechanical failure. He was battling with his own teammate, of course, Daniel Ricciardo, and I think they actually had a bit of a clash with Dan coming home 5th in the end, of course, and then Max earlier on was battling with Kimi. I mean, I think you were commenting on how Max again just pushing the limits again, battling Kimi, but Kimi kept his cool and was able to get past no problem and end up on the podium, while Max, of course, again going from hero in Austria to zero in Britain with the retirement. So
you can see as well, you consider Renault after that upgrade the previous race for Hulkenberg, and then later on Ricciardo, and then you've got 7 days later Max Verstappen, that clearly they've got some issues there to rectify. As much as on any given race they might have a good package all around, say a Red Bull, or it just suits the characteristics of their car or for Renault, but when it doesn't, it seems as though they've got still a fair bit of work to do. And I don't know, when you look at it in that long-term picture in Season 5 of the hybrid era, they're clearly third cab off the rank. Now the talk is really whether Ferraris usurp Mercedes with the most power.
Yeah, well, that's probably you could say it looks like it is the case now, with Ferrari being the benchmark in that sort of battle. But don't rule out Mercedes just yet. They could be perhaps one upgrade away from being back on par with Ferrari, of course, but Ferrari have just done, I mean, we'll talk about it in a week or two's time when we look back at the first half of the season, that they've just knuckled down and done a phenomenal job this season, not only with the power unit but with the chassis as well. The fact that it seems to be working around every circuit this year. Last year they sort of started to get the trick around the circuits that Mercedes had dominated for a long time, and this year, as you said, places like Montreal, now Silverstone, which have been Mercedes strongholds, they've come and conquered. And even Austria, they were stronger than they were last year, and of course Red Bull won that race in the end. But if Red Bull were there, you could have seen Ferrari definitely get the jump.
And you'd rather than trade off superiority at circuits like Monaco or Hungary to have an all-round package where something like an Azerbaijan, Canada, Belgium, Italy, and they can really take it to Mercedes, who have just dominated that really since 2014, and that's when they're going to get the huge bundle of points, if not be right sniffing down their necks, I think. So you can see that coupled with what's happened, those sentiments from the Mercedes crew, that they're under siege in all departments.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess those races, as you said, Spa, Monza, coming up after the mid-season break, they're going to be really telling for Ferrari if they can win, if not both of them, one of those Grand Prix at least, which you'd hope is Monza for the sake of the Tifosi.
And we hope maybe Belgium for a certain Kimi Räikkönen. That'd be a nice sight.
Given that every year we tip Kimi Räikkönen to win that race and it just doesn't come to pass, but hopefully if it's going to be his last year this year, you hope that would be the case. But let's have a look anyway at the best of the rest. And Nico Hulkenberg, you mentioned him before, he didn't finish in Austria, but he was 6th this time out for Renault, given that he was a sole finisher for the French team. Sainz crashing out with Grosjean earlier. Then we had Esteban Ocon and Sergio Perez both scoring points for Force India, of course. Perez getting promoted into the points just after the end of the race because a time penalty was applied for Pierre Gasly, because he might have a legal overtake on Checo to begin with. So yeah, Gasly demoted from 10th to 11th, and of course Checo brought up into 10th. So solid for Force India once again. Fernando Alonso with a typical Fernando Alonso drive to P8 with points there, and only the only point scorer for McLaren once again. So, it's hard, when we look back at the winners and losers from this triple header. One of the big losers, definitely McLaren, who went from being, I think, 5th in the Constructors, dropping down 2 positions with the fact that Haas have come up, and then, of course, Force India have been firing as well.
Yeah, couple that with Eric Boulier's departure prior to Britain, and you can see that the pressure's rising with each race on Stoffel Vandoorne, who's really been completely off the map this season. And last year he could be forgiven, but this year it seems, as disgruntled as Alonso might be, that Vandoorne just seems to be stuck in this first gear, often out in Q1, and in the races, even with this high attrition, he still seems to be squabbling for a 12th or 13th. So he needs a good couple of solid races in the back half of the season if he's going to shore up a third season with McLaren. Otherwise his future might be elsewhere, as a shame as it would be to say when he entered and everyone had such huge hopes for him.
Yeah, it's really difficult to watch Vandoorne this season because, given the hype that he came into F1 around, said that he could be the next Alan Prost, for example, and just seeing how the way that this season, not only just for McLaren, but for him as well, you'd think even if the team's having a difficult season, that at least individual performances from the driver can go a long way to making at least his season a lot better than it is. So the fact that he hasn't done that is just making it really difficult for him to perhaps retain that seat for next year. And given Lando Norris's popularity as well, other teams have tried to poach him, even though he's still fighting in F2 this year, shows that he could be one that McLaren have got to promote sooner rather than later if they're to keep him in-house.
And there's a bit of talk as well that even a Carlos Sainz could be parachuted in if Renault were to say acquire Esteban Ocon on loan from Mercedes after they've taken on board the Red Bull affiliated Sainz. So you could see a little bit of a switcheroo there, and that would be interesting to see another Spaniard. Who knows if Alonso will be there, but could have 2 Spaniards at McLaren if he were to stay on.
Yeah, it's a bit of a poison chalice at the moment, the McLaren seat. I guess Daniel Ricciardo perhaps linked with it earlier on in the season, but given the situation that they're in, it's perhaps not the seat that everyone will be jumping at immediately. And you talk about whether it's a team that perhaps in the long run could be better off. The fact that they need a team builder in the team, which Alonso is trying to do, but then it's just not really working from management at the moment. So yeah, that's going to be something to look at or whatever, and see who's going to be there next year, because it really is a bit of an unknown at the moment. But keeping it on the British Grand Prix anyway, Magnussen, as we said, was the only point scorer for Haas after Grosjean's crash. As I said, they had a solid qualifying with both cars in the top 10 and then just thrown away again by Grosjean. So, there's just... given where they are still in the constructors' standings, they're 5th at the moment behind Renault. If Grosjean was able to score points regularly, because he only scored his first points, of course, in Austria. If he had scored points in every race like Magnussen has, then they could be just up to par with Renault, or even higher than Renault in the constructors in 4th. So it's a lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda talk you could talk about with Haas, but yeah, they really have come on fire during this triple header.
Yeah, and it's kind of the juxtaposition that is Haas. They've never really cleanly executed since debuting in 2016, the oft-touted one-car entry they had that first season, when they really just had this almost ghost of some sort of... you could say child that was maybe floating around the garage, just prone to outbursts every so often when things didn't go his way. And then the other one in Grosjean, and he's almost devolved into this so-called ghost and barely a presence on track, and it's Kevin Magnussen doing all the heavy lifting. And you've got to wonder if, say, a Charles Leclerc were to maybe have another 12 months just to prepare himself for the inevitable Ferrari drive, that would make a lot of sense. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if if Grosjean's finally giving his marching orders, that Leclerc and Magnussen, that would be quite a fearsome combination.
Or even a Perez and Magnussen as well, of course. The two McLaren rejects, of course, end up in the same team together. That'd be a pretty, lethal combination there at Haas. But I guess, we can only hypothesise and play Nostradamus with what's going to happen with those seats next year, of course. But I guess we mentioned it earlier too. Great pace from Sauber was unrewarded, of course, with the dual retirements. Ericsson, we detailed, he crashed. Charles Leclerc with the tyre failure. Just as soon as he came out of the pits, he's on the radio. It's like, guys, I think there's a problem. And from there, basically, it's game over. So that was a bit sad for Sauber. And it's good to see as well that, they're being disappointed by these sort of results because, when they've got the pace to score points on both cars, not only just one, it makes these retirements a lot more painful. So, they're a team to look out for over the next few races because I reckon they'll be able to score perhaps more regular points than, someone like Toro Rosso, who, again, Brendan Hartley had a horror of a weekend. He had a huge crash in qualifying, of course, then couldn't even make the start of the race because they took too long to change his power unit. There was just a lot of repair to be done to that car. So, yeah, Annus Horribilis continues for Brendan Hartley.
Yeah, on Sauber, first of all, you've got to wonder if they sustain this development curve, they could get to the end of this season and they're legitimately in a place to maybe snag a top 5 or a 6th, maybe 2 cars getting some solid points. They seem like they're not so reliant on circumstance. They're just genuinely close to that Q1 or ballpark top of Q2 most weekends. And Marcus Ericsson always flying under the radar, and he made an honest error on Sunday, but you can see that they've got some confidence there, and whatever happens for Charles Leclerc, Sauber itself is going to have benefited from his own input, and it's just given them that swagger that they've been without for probably since 2012 again, when they had that great run of podiums. So who knows where they'll shape up in the constructors, but certainly McLaren will be wondering if they're going to be under threat sooner than later if Alonso's only able to scrape in 2 or 4 points here or there, and now down to Toro Rosso, who've been really, after what we saw at Bahrain with that 4th and then maybe a 6th again for Gasly at Monaco, they've really not done a hell of a lot. And you've got to say for Hartley, he's really been done over, and as much as the talk is that his career will be limited to this season, he hasn't had much of an opportunity to show his hand.
No, not really, and I guess we can just emphasise that over and over again, the fact that, I guess if he was given the opportunity proper, that, it could be a lot better than it is. He's a capable driver, he's a multiple world champion, he's won big races in the past, but just where he's at with Toro Rosso, it's a bit sad. And he's got the experience, he's not a rookie as such, he's an experienced driver, and I'm sure he'll be giving a lot of valuable feedback back to the team with the development and with Honda, of course, as well. But again, it's just like, you want to see some good results. If it's a results-driven business, and if results is what's going to get him a seat next year again with Toro Rosso, then, he's got to be given those results.
Yeah, I think that back half of the season, you got to hope that you've got the news now that Red Bull's going to be with Honda, so whether that somehow fast-track some sort of focus towards 2019 as far as trialling components, and they've got to write their entire season off from this point, or maybe they find some solutions in that summer break that Hartley at least gets a clean run for a few races, so he doesn't leave F1 on a sour note.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, I guess, it for the British Grand Prix, but just to finally bring up that, Ferrari, perhaps the biggest winner of this triple header. They've got a 20-point lead now in the Constructors' Championship, and nice to point out too that Kimi Räikkönen's been on the podium for all 3 races in back-to-back weekends. So, he's collected the most points, if you will, of anyone in the triple header. Sebastian Vettel, of course, 2 times on the podium, and then, of course, Mercedes having that double DNF in Austria would have cost them a whole lot. So, yeah, big winners there. And Kevin Magnussen, best of the rest in 7th in the Drivers' Championship as well. So well done to him. And then we already said Haas into 5th in the championship as well.
Yeah, you can see for Kimi Räikkönen, he's so maligned. He has 2 or 3 great races and one poor qualifying or a race, and suddenly it's like, oh, he's a relic. He should have been gone 5 years ago. But the truth is, he's been unlucky probably not to have won a race 2 or 3 times this season, just like his compatriot in Bottas. Again, we raise at every edition that for a while there we probably got a bit despondent that it was never going to happen, but at this point you're again into that position of wondering not if but when he'll have that breakthrough.
Yeah, it's very hard, with Kimi because, you get to stages where it's like, it wouldn't be a bad thing if he retired at the end of this year, but then he goes and does things like he has over the past 3 weeks, and then it's just like, perhaps we could deal with another year of him being on the grid. Either way, like, if he leaves, we're going to miss him regardless. He's such a great character to have around the sport, the Iceman, of course, but at the same time, like, if he's not delivering those results or whatever, his teammates won 4 races already this season in the same car. Kimi, I guess, as you say, a bit unlucky with the way things have panned out for him. He needs to, I guess, be able to win at least a race, before he retires for Ferrari, because, he's not won one since 2013 now, so it's a long time ago when you look back at it.
Yeah, as much as the talk of maybe this will be it for him, I think it'd sit a lot better with all of his fans if he could just be on the top step once more. That'd be a nice way to sign off.
Yeah, nice way to sign off indeed. So let's talk about driver of the day now. I could have easily said Lewis Hamilton if the fact that he didn't go out and say those things as he did after the race. Like, he put in a great drive for recovery to get back to finishing second on the podium at least, but the fact that, he had to say, Ferrari intentionally tried to punt him off or whatever, it's just like, forget it, because, we haven't seen Ferrari do that this year, pointing fingers or be petty in that sort of sense. So, it's not something you expect a 4-time world champion to do, and especially at his home race too, with all those adoring fans, because it then puts that mindset amongst them that, the other team are the cheaters.
Oh, it's the paradox of Lewis Hamilton, and I think it's probably a bit of concurring between both of us and a lot of fans. As much as they mightn't like Lewis Hamilton as an individual, they appreciate that he's probably the best driver on the grid, and certainly of the generation since the 21st century perhaps, and where he stacks up all time is another debate, but he's very questionable when it comes to his persona off the track, and he goes and does all these great things behind the wheel, and he almost instantly undoes it as soon as he opens his mouth, and that's not going to change anytime soon with his current demeanour.
Yeah, it just seems most of it's done for show, I guess. The fact that when he got out of the car after qualifying, he looked visibly shaken as well, but I think a lot of, the panting and the moaning as well just seemed like it was a bit of Hollywood there from Lewis. And, as much as F1 is about entertainment too, you like the sport side of it as well. You want to see a bit of realism there, so, that's not something I really appreciate either. But driver of the day, it's hard, because Seb put in a really good drive to win the race. He made the move off Bottas. He even had a neck issue as well for most of the weekend. So, kudos to him for doing that. But I've got to give it to Kimi this time. I think he's done an exceptional job, not just in this race, but over the past 3 races as well, to put Ferrari in a position where, they're leading the Constructors' Championship. And that's something we've been saying all year. Perhaps Ferrari are not going to win the Constructors' Championship again because Kimi isn't getting the results that they need. So, how in Austria it wasn't a Ferrari. No, sorry. How it wasn't a Ferrari 1-2 this time. It's a bit silly, but hopefully we could see that later on down the track where we see multiple Ferrari 1-2. So good job to their number 2 and Kimi.
Yeah, I'd have to say Vettel for mine. Clutch victory considering he was in duress, particularly on that Saturday, and he came within a cat's whisker of pole, and that would have been a huge psychological blow to the very temperamental Hamilton. Who knows what his mindset would have been if he hadn't have been again lining up first, but it was obviously academic come Sunday, and then you see just the way Vettel, probably not for the first time. You're talking third or fourth time this season he's led when there's been a safety car intervention, and at a China or an Azerbaijan, he's ended up being compromised in the long run. But this time he was patient and he made that move stick, and he easily could have butchered it or ended up just P2 and not capitalised on a day when Hamilton, I guess, as much as he finished one position behind him, he wasn't breathing down his neck in a literal sense. So you can say that this is one that could be the difference come the end of the season.
Yeah, exactly. So that wraps up the British Grand Prix, the triple header, and let's move on into the digest now. And we mentioned him before, Santino Ferrucci. Well, he created headlines over the weekend, all for the wrong reasons. He's been given a 4-race ban in the F2 Championship because he made multiple hits on his Trident teammate Arjun Mani over the weekend, and then he was caught, I think, on the straight or whatever, with his glove off as well whilst in the car and holding his mobile phone. And, big no-no, of course, that, but just the way that he went and hit his teammate, just so reckless and endangering and whatnot. But just, I guess, it's sort of the way it's unfolded, the fact that, other things have come out about his character, his father as well, being involved in this sort of thing. And I think he's basically killed any chance he had of ever going to F1 as well with that. And I'm surprised Haas hasn't already cut ties with this guy.
They have. Officially, he's off the books.
So there you go. He's no longer a Ferrari junior with a chance to get into the Haas F1 team. So yeah, just even though he describes it as a brain fade, it was a moment of pure emotion or whatever, it just goes to show you that if you go that far, that, this sort of thing can happen. And unfortunately, you're not going to see that with Lewis Hamilton, no matter what he says. But yeah, there are circumstances for this sort of behaviour, and I'm glad that they've come down hard on him.
Hashtag make America great again.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, sorry.
The talk there, they wanted to, perhaps with the leverage they believe they have since they run the universe, the Ferruccis, that they could demand that the Trident team run a livery inspired behind their political motives to toss out a certain incumbent president. So clearly any kind of leverage they thought they had is now non-existent, and whether he can ever cultivate a career in the distant future or not, that's something he's going to have to take a long time on a lonely beach to consider his thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. So, great way for them to exercise that, to show that, that sort of behaviour is not tolerable or accepted whatsoever. But we got some news in regards to the future of F1 as well, with a lot of meetings going on over the past few weeks. And of course, those regulations have got to be, cemented very soon. And could the manufacturers be eyeing a U-turn on 2021 as far as the power unit is concerned? Because apparently, due to the fact there's not been overwhelming interest from new manufacturers, the current manufacturers are looking at perhaps keeping the current model of power unit with that MGUH on board, perhaps standardising a couple of the components, but not getting rid of the MGUH now.
Yeah, it's in tandem with the lack of any kind of news about those regulations. We kept thinking that the 30th of June would be the deadline, and there's been not a whisper in any direction that there's going to be some sort of announcement outside of that framework we were given probably in March or April.
It was Bahrain, I think it happened.
And at this point, very little coming from the manufacturers, and then also the talk that the current manufacturers are doing what they can to delay any announcements, so it gets to a stage where it's too late for anyone to commit. Even from this late stage, 2.5 years, it seems like that's almost a minimum to prepare yourself if you want to be competitive. And we all know what happened with Honda when they were rushed in prematurely by a certain Ron Dennis, and that's clearly taken them years to recover from. So in this case, it could be a fizzer for 2021 being the revolution. It could just be a status quo of, say, 2017 being phase 2 of the hybrids, 2019 we've got this middle ground, and that could end up being the most significant change, perhaps with just a few standardised additions from 2021.
Yeah, fizz is probably the word that I was thinking of using. It just seems a bit of a disappointment that, given the fact there was so much hype around, there could be new marques looking to get into the sport and whatnot, and now it seems like we're just going to be left with the incumbent four. So Porsche and Aston Martin have been on those meetings that they've had in regards to the rules for the future. But it seems like there's nothing really big coming out of there. But perhaps it makes sense with Red Bull's decision to tie up with Honda, perhaps as a backup to if they don't get that Aston Martin project from 2021.
It makes you wonder whether 2020 beyond might be the cutoff when Honda acquires Red Bull, if that came to pass.
Well, there you go. That's another possibility there. So where for the last 2 years we were thinking 2021 is going to be this universe-changing year, it perhaps could just fizzle out to be, as you say, a mere phase 2 of what we've already got at the moment. So that would be disappointing indeed. Another thing that was broached, I guess, was the possibility of perhaps paying points to everybody on the grid. So from 1 down to 20, 25 points down to 1 point for the person who finishes last. Liberty looking at the possibility of that. I see that not everyone is for that concept.
Not everyone. More like one is for it and the other
99
concerned
are not.
stakeholders, no thanks.
Yeah, so to me it just sounds like, it doesn't sound like a great idea anyway, because, the points at F1 are precious. It's I guess, it went from being top 6 or whatever to now top 10, and to be in that top 10 a lot of work goes into it. So giving points to everyone that basically sort of waters it all down, basically. Like, you might have teams who don't want to fight for top 10 anymore because they could just accrue points over the season.
What if we get to a point at the finale where all you got to do is coast around dead last, 20th, even if you say 40 laps down the minimum race distance, and suddenly it's like, well done, you're world champion.
Yeah, so, like you see in other categories, supercars, where they do have points all the way down to last or whatever. It's a different kettle of fish. But yeah, for F1, just, I guess, even extending it to top 15 would be, I guess, watering it down in that sense. So yeah, keep it as top 10, I'd say.
Yeah, I think at that point you don't want it to be like a NASCAR configuration where there's absolutely no incentive to go hard and you just accumulate. It's got to have a line, and that exclusivity must remain there, and it's part of where you see the skirmishes that take place in that midfield, and more often than not they sort it out, but it does lead to some good action when it means so much to them, when it boils down to that prize money and survival ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. So keep it as the top 10, we say, and hopefully that'll be the case, and that one person who wants it doesn't get what they want.
Yeah, enough said.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move it on then. Supercars, of course, with the Townsville 400 over the weekend. Let's go over the talking points quickly. We talked at length, I guess, about Craig Lowndes and how he announced his retirement. I guess the farewell tour starts for him. Had started for him in Townsville. We'll come to that shortly. But yeah, Jamie Whincup, imperious again, as he's always been, ever since we started coming to Townsville, which was 10 years ago. So he's won a race there in each of the 10 editions we've had so far. So he won on the first, on the Saturday race, of course. He got a good run to the checkered flag. And then, of course, being on the podium for the second race too on Sunday, he's got a 403-point deficit now in the championship standings to Scott McLaughlin. So I guess a weekend that Triple Eight needed, given the fact that they hadn't really won anything since earlier in the season. Well, for Whincup, it was since Tassie.
Well, you can say history suggests Triple Eight gets its act together in this mid part of the season in the run into the Enduro Cup, and they're so clinical at that phase in most circumstances, and clearly last year that went a long way for Whincup towards consolidating his last gasp title bid, and you can see that for the Ford Brigade and DGR Team P, they won't be losing their minds just yet. And Scott McLaughlin, he probably didn't have his best weekend, but he did a good job again to at least pick up those points, and he still maintains a handy lead.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come to Scotty in a moment, because it was a clean sweep for Triple Eight with Shane Van Gisbergen scoring his first win since Adelaide. So since the start of the year, he hadn't won a race, and he won his third race of the year. He's solidified second in the championship as well. So faultless drive from Shane from pole position. But yeah, Scotty McLaughlin limiting the damage, of course. He had pole in the Saturday race, but just didn't have the pace to keep up with the Triple Eight cars, and he conceded that the Ford that he had was just not quick enough all weekend, and I guess he took it on the chin, but he still bagged a pair of podiums, which was good to see too, and he started 7th on the Sunday race and ended up back in 3rd at the end of the race, battling away with Craig Lowndes, of course, on both occasions. So, yeah, I guess he keeps that lead in the championship, but it's a classic. It's a classic case of making the most of the weekends where you're not going to be strong enough.
And that's the worst that Scott McLaughlin has, and it's frightening when he's at his best that he really just cleans it all up, and I think he's still going to be the odds-on champion from this point. Yeah,
like given the fact that last year it's something that they've really changed about the way that they go about it this year is the fact that on those terrible weekends or terrible days, McLaughlin has been scoring the points and has been getting those podiums even though his rivals are winning ahead of him, so that's why he's still got that championship lead and by a healthy margin as well.
Yeah, and I guess when you look at Triple Eight and where they're at, they tend to have these weekends where when they're on, they're red hot, but they've probably been a little bit more inconsistent. Maybe 5th or 6th thereabouts, not terrible, but they're not quite getting cars on the podium each time, and again, that they could be the points which the way that McLaughlin's going probably will leave it a bit too much out of their grasp unless they come and sweep all before them during the Enduro Cup.
Yeah, well, we've got some key races coming up, of course, Ipswich next weekend and the night race in Sydney too, which is just a single race.
The Bend, is that before?
Yeah, the Bend as well before the Enduro Cup, so yeah, busy period coming up for the Supercars Championship. Now, we already talked about Lowndes earlier, bagged a pair of 4ths over the weekend, but ended up in the top 10 shootout too on Sunday. So, he's standing by his retirement decision as well, even though he's showing this good form. But yeah, I guess it's the farewell tour where we'll get to see him go around one last time and hopefully some wins to come out of it as well.
Yeah, you'd imagine that the way he's going, he's a lot closer than he was in 2017, and any given day there, he's always consistent. Maybe the third of the Triple Eights more often than not, but I think that, again, you'd have to back him as if nowhere else at Bathurst, he tends to just get everything together.
Yeah, he and Stevie Richards at Bathurst, it's safe to tip them perhaps, but not quite given the complexity of that race in itself. But yeah, one of the other major talking points to come out of the weekend was the discussion for perhaps changing seasons for the Supercars Championship. What about staging it during the Australian summer? So there was apparently some discussions between Supercars officials and stakeholders over the weekend that, let's change the way the championship, when the championship is staged. So from 2020, let's have it from September to May. So it's held primarily during the summer months here in Australia. Of course, dealing with Christmas and New Year, and holding it essentially over 2 calendar years, like we see Formula E done internationally, and of course now the WEC Super Season as well, which is held over 1.5 years essentially. So given the fact that in the winter when Supercars is on, it has to contest with rival footy codes such as AFL and NRL for viewership. Over the summer, perhaps with cricket, it might not have too much competition, and given the fact that there's not a lot of motorsport on at that time of year as well, perhaps it could be something that works out for those guys.
Yeah, the only anomaly will be that it would probably see the season commence with the Enduros as the first or second round at least, and Bathurst would be third at the latest, so that would be an odd one to get the head around, rather than it being almost the pivotal piece in the championship equation. But I guess when it comes to logistics, that there's got to be some merit to giving it its own identity there, much like you might see with like the NBA did when it seemed to thrive more so when it was back in the heyday. I think it used to be...
the NBL, you mean?
Yeah, NBL, of course, yeah, back when it was in its pomp in the 80s and 90s, and then the switch around, it probably hasn't been the same. So you've got to wonder for for supercars if it did become a summer sport, and perhaps that lull you have in midwinter when they tend to go 4 or 5 weeks without a race, it'd sit a lot easier if that was the case through maybe mid to late December till mid-January, when you've got all these other events on to tide you over, and they're still going racing all through October, November, then late January through until May, by which point the footy seasons will be well and truly in action, and you've got all the other sports, motorsport internationally, and that's a natural segue.
Yeah, but, as you said before, with perhaps then starting the season with the Enduros as well, like, is there the chance that they might even be a bit brave here and move the Bathurst 1000 from its traditional October slot to have it so it's at the end of the championship,
Have it in May suddenly.
Yeah, have it in the middle of May. So,
or dare we say, what about a radical idea where they combine it with the 12-hour? That'd be a ludicrous thought.
In the middle of, in early February, that could potentially be one way to look at it. But anyway, it's an idea that was brought out over the weekend. It's probably something in its infancy, but, they've already locked in 2 of the races for next year with the Adelaide 500 dates confirmed, and of course the Australian Grand Prix dates as we talked about last week as well, so it means supercars will be on the same weekend there too. So, we'll see what the calendar looks like for 2020 when it comes to next year.
Yeah, still plenty to play out, another season at least, so sure, the way they go, they take their time getting the announcements out for the calendar, so we probably won't know more for another couple of months at least on next season, much less 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, exactly, and all the races that are yet to be officially confirmed as well, as far as being on the calendar still. So that's all for supercars anyway, and as before we wrap things up, our sporting moments of the week, and this week it's really hard to go past. We had the final State of Origin game on last night, and for me, it's really hard to go past the individual that is Billy Slater. The fact that he played his last game in Origin last night, he got to be farewelled as the captain too, with Greg Inglis out with injury for that final game, and to send him out on a winning note as well, with Queensland prevailing 18-12 to deny New South Wales that series sweep.
It was probably an appropriate scoreline which summarised how close the series was, with Queensland having its moments of brilliance, but on a sustained level, New South Wales were all around just a bit too good, and they had more than their share of moments last night, but Queensland wanted it a bit more, home crowd, and then to send off such a hero in Billy Slater, and that pride to avoid the clean sweep, and they ground it out as they'd done so often in the glory years. You saw how many times they'd be under siege from a New South Wales team really hungry, and they'd stave them off. So this one, at least, it gives Queensland something to work with into 2019, when you can draw an almost definitive line now that Slater's the last of that old brigade, and you've probably only got Greg Inglis there who's got any ties, and who knows how much longer he might have. But I guess if not last year, and then that news with Smith on the eve of this year's Origin, which really took many by surprise, I guess this signifies the official end of that chapter.
Yeah, it's a significant chapter as that. We look at the names with Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith, Jonathan Thurston, now Billy Slater. You almost forget amongst those guys that Darius Boyd also announced his retirement from rep football as well. Will GI hang up the boots as well, given the fact that, he could sort of extend the life of his club footy career with the Rabbitohs next season. I don't know when he's coming back for them after that thumb injury he had in the last game. So it really is the end of an era there. But even with all the pomp around Queensland last night with their victory, and of course controversially Billy Slater named man of the series for some, given the fact that he only played 2 games and New South Wales won the series, I guess to farewell the great man, it's a great honour for him to win that Wally Lewis medal. But we can't take anything away from New South Wales. They've just been the better team all series. I like the fact that they've just instilled a new culture within that organisation. The fact that, they play for each other rather than the individuals like it was previously. And it's going to be exciting to see 2 new teams take the field next year, of course, with these Baby Blues, of course, with that one series win under the belt. Can they do the same thing again next year, where they'll probably face a Baby Maroon team?
It's arguably the bigger question if they can go back to back and show that this will be New South Wales era rather than being a blip and then Queensland renews its effort.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess unless you had anything more to add to that one, I think we should wrap things up.
No, I think that's all from this end. It's been pretty action-packed as usual. It's probably nice to have one where it's all done with and we can all draw our breath after what has been a crazy 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, the month of June, as it always is. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week to preview the German Grand Prix. But yeah, as far as having a weekend off F1 is concerned, as much as we love it, we do need a bit of time away from it too. So thanks, guys, for tuning in this week. And yeah, we'll have the German Grand Prix ready for you next time.
Till then.